Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar, the Era of Accelerated Change series, hosted by Stellenbosch Business School Executive Development in 2024. I am Tharisha Pillay, the Proposal and Design Specialist for Digital Programs here at SPS Ed. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. 2024 indicates that businesses are bracing for an increased pace of change, building on the record levels experienced in 2023. Geopolitical forces, accelerated climate disruptions, dynamic social and consumer habits, and real-time AI advancements means that now, more than ever before, businesses need to be aligned, agile, and adaptive. Over the course of the year, we are hosting a series of Power Hour webinars focused on the concept of change within 4 areas of businesses today, namely AI, risk, strategy, and leadership. Today, we are talking about risk management in a webinar titled 22nd Century Risk Management, a Risky Business. So, how do we plan for risks that we don't even know are risks yet? Today, we are here to unpack strategies to anticipate and mitigate risks in a world where change is the only constant, and with the aim to safeguard your business and its future. Joining us in the discussion are 3 prominent thought leaders. I will give you a very brief introduction, but their bios are available on the slides that are running through in today's webinar. First up, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Nadine Rix. Nadine, glad to have you here. Nadine is a risk and resilience specialist with over 17 years in the risk management space across West and South Africa, operating in senior roles across both regions. Then, I would like to welcome Vanessa Thurlwell, Senior Risk Consultant at Mondial Business and Risk Consultants, Technical Advisor for Bank CETA and UMSA, and a facilitator on the new online risk management program here at SPS Ed. Finally, we welcome Dr. Mark Nasila, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at First National Bank Risk, leading member of the National Institute for Theoretical Physics and Computational Sciences, a research fellow at Stellenbosch University, and a recent author, having just published his first book, Discovering Africa's AI Identity. Details to follow will be at the end. Nadine, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump right in and start by just kind of saying what I feel or my views are where the risk management profession is failing business at the moment. And I'm doing this because I sensed all of this landscape change during COVID. Everybody was kind of like scrambling. And since then, I feel like we're just on this absolute roller coaster ride of how to manage risk, how to manage disruption. There's so many things going on. And I think fundamentally at the core of it, as a risk management professional, we need to change the way in which we do risk management, challenge those old traditional views of how we do risk. And I say this because most of you will be familiar with the typical ways in which we analyze a business. You know, we do our SWOT analysis, we do our pestle analysis, we look at things like what's our environment, we scan the environment, we identify events, you know, and then we kind of have debates around what is the likelihood of this taking place, or what is the impact that it would have if it takes place. And these discussions can go on and on and on forever. Now, while these models that we traditionally use are very good in creating order, I think all of us at this point in time like a sense of order somewhere in the chaos. The challenge is that they only really work in environments that are predictable and stable. So traditional risk management speaks to analyzing our environment with the assumption that this environment is going to be there for the next, 3 to 5 years. We look at our risks because we think they are going to be there for the next 3 to 5 years. And unfortunately, in the current environment that we're in, this way of doing it is no longer acceptable. It doesn't suit businesses. It's not fit for most businesses that I'm aware of. I currently work in a fintech. where things come at us at all angles every single day. So the approach that we've kind of taken on our end is a model that is known as the Cynefin model that speaks to complexity. And what we do is we say there are certain things in a business, there's different categories of events that can take place. There's ordered events, and then there's the unordered state. And in the ordered space, we typically have simple things that can go wrong. We have simple things and complicated things. And the way that I like to explain this is if you are driving in your car and your fuel light goes on, you can see, oh, okay, I need to go put in fuel. This is a simple problem that we have in a business. So if something goes wrong, most people in the business are equipped to deal with it. They know enough about their job, they know enough about the risks that are involved, and they can deal with it on their own. Complicated problems could be typically where I hear a noise in my car. As a female, I've learned that increasing the volume on my car is not necessarily going to make the problem go away. I actually need to go to a mechanic and have them look at it. So a complicated problem, I can still more or less sense what's going on, but I most likely will need an expert to help me to fix it. Typically, I get to work, and possibly the experience that I just had, for some reason, the Zoom links just didn't work. And I needed an expert to come in and help me to say, this is why it's not working. So this is where traditional risk management works well. We look at our controls we put in place, and it's preventative, and we move along our day. The problem is where we currently find ourselves in business is very much in the unordered state, where there is typically chaos in the cyber world. It's things like account takeovers, ransomware attacks, phishing attempts, and things like that, where something happens instantaneously and affects the business. Here we need to, as business leaders, know how to act first. So we act first. When I'm driving in my car and it bursts down in flames, I'm not going to sit in it and try and analyze, oh, where does it come from? I'm going to get out as quickly as possible. Then I'm going to stand back and say, okay, what just happened? And how do I need to move forward? How do I need to respond? So chaos, typically, when a massive business disruption takes place, this can be a form of a natural disaster. We've just been through a pandemic. Like I said, ransomware attacks, cyber attacks, these are things that requires immediate action. And then more often than not, we find ourselves in the complex stage where I can hear a noise in my car. I don't know what it is. I have to go to a mechanic, but I can't stop driving. So he needs to fix it while I'm kind of doing donuts in his backyard. And that's typically the world we find ourselves in today. And that's where risk management really needs to be adaptive to say, I've seen something goes wrong, or I've seen something going wrong. The business can't stop. I can't go for a 2-day breakaway and analyze the risk and the likelihood and the impact. I need to do something now. And after I've done it, I need to check, did it work? Did it fix it? If it didn't, okay, cool. No, it didn't. I need to go back and do something else again. So your risk management function needs to be very, very closely aligned with all of the operations in the business. So it can sense when things go wrong, and it can immediately implement either preventative controls, corrective controls, defensive controls to make sure that the disruption is now a normal part of business. And this is now how I deal with it from a risk perspective. So what we do at the organization where I work, and some of the consulting that I've done before, is when we look at strategy, and typically strategy and risk, kind of opposite polars of each other. Strategy is where I want to go, and risks are the things that could prevent me from getting there. Traditionally, we've looked at likelihood and impact, and this can be very much a debate. And then we put in place some sort of controls. In terms of moving from traditional risk management to more creating organizational resilience, that teamwork of when things go wrong, I can go in, I can fix it, I can amend it, I can fail, I can make a mistake until I get it right. In order to get that going in an organization, we've changed the question from what is the likelihood of this happening and what is the impact it can have, to asking a more resilience-focused question to say, when this thing happens, how vulnerable am I to it, and what's the speed of onset? So I can debate a ransomware attack until I'm blue in the face. Oh, it's highly likely. No, it's not likely. Yes, it's very likely. Oh, we've got control, so it's never going to happen. That's not the question. The question is relevant. The question is, or should be, when this happens, how quickly is it going to affect my business? How long do I have to figure out what went wrong? And how adaptable am I? What's my vulnerability? What's my backup plan? What's my response plan? When I see an alert going off, what do I do in the moment? So a lot of the risk functions or a lot of the risk focus has changed from this long-term view, the day-to-day operations, looking at each and every business unit to say, what is the thing that when it happens can bring you down? How quickly will it affect you? And what's your backup plan? Do people know what to do when it happens? Coming back to the car analogy, you know, we can get in our car in the morning and check our seatbelts, make sure the fuel is in and all these things. But if we're not prepared for an accident, we'll be the ones that kind of chaotically don't know what to do. But if you've kind of had the conversation to say, well, in an emergency, this is what we did. This is how we communicate. This is how we do troubleshooting. We tend to see people more comfortably take ownership of them actively engaging and managing the risk instead of knee-jerk reactions and absolute chaos ensuing in the business. So that's just a very quick, brief overview in terms of how we feel that risk management professionals and our businesses view risk should really change to adapt to the business world that we're in today to deal with daily disruptions, whether they are big or small, incremental, and really build that adaptability in our organizations. I believe that's my 10 minutes. I'm not too sure. Okay, so with that, I've got a couple of slides. If the audience wants to ask questions, we'll see where the questions go. I've got more slides on topics around data and anything like that. Whether we get to the slides or not, I don't really mind. But I think for me, the most important thing is to really create a framework whereby we can actively engage in building organizational resilience versus just normal risk management. Dr. Mark, Vanessa, from your side, let's start the debate on how do we live in this disruptive era?
Yeah, we're living in very interesting times now. And I think the current reality has not just changed the context, but also the scope and the construct of risk management and its function in general going forward, literally for every organization out there.
Yeah, and I think, Nadine, I liked how you broke up the ordered and the unordered events and the complicated, the chaos, and all of that. I think it's just a lovely way of packaging it, because something that we've been moving on from since COVID is not predicting the headline event and the story of what exactly is going to happen, because it's impossible, but rather understanding all the impacts and the vulnerabilities, our controls, how we can respond, and so on, that in whatever eventuality, if it's a COVID, or it's an accident, or it's a data issue, or whatever it can be, that we know what the different impacts are to our organization, that we are ready to respond whatever the storyline is going to be.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you're mentioning data. One of the things that we realize in terms of building this organizational resilience, there's three areas that we typically feel is incredibly necessary for this to function. At the root of it all is data. You know, in terms of a resilience model, if you don't have data readily available, it's very, very tricky to enable a business to actually react. You know, it's the thing of if a customer goes into a bank, you know, and he starts screaming loudest, is he really the problem? Or is there, you know, $1 million customer sitting somewhere in investor relations that needs your attention? So if we don't have real-time, accurate, available data, it's very difficult to build these resilience capabilities. So we have a strong reliance on, and we do a lot of work around data cleanup. The amount of data or unnecessary data that organizations gather is astounding. And I think the second thing that then goes hand in hand with that is to have the systems and processes that will alert us when something needs attention. So if, for example, you're doing online sales, if there's an unusual spike from a particular user or a particular IP address, or if a credit card is being used multiple times, most likely that is a risky area. So using the data that you have and then building systems and processes around that to say, well, these are very important things for us. How do I look for a hacker that's in my system? How do I find somebody that's crawling around in there? What are my alert systems and triggers? And then the last component for us, which is incredibly important, is empowering our people to actually act. Resilience is not something that sits with a risk function. We need to have a culture of trust where we trust people to do the right thing. And also, if they don't know what to do, to actually say, hey, I've seen this thing, I don't know what it is, but I think we need to go there. So one of the things that when I started my journey in building resilience, one of the things our MD asked me when I laid out the plans, he said to me, what do you need? I said to him, I need room to fail, because we're going to try things, and we're going to try things differently. We're not always going to get it right. And I think a lot of organizations need to learn that you have to fail in order to figure out what to do to get it right. And there's a very, very low tolerance for that. And I think it's important that we understand that we're all navigating this space, and it is a weird space and it is a new space, but we need to allow people to fail so that they can bring in the creative ways of managing risk.
Yeah, maybe Nadine, I should just add a bit on why data has actually become more critical, especially in risk management. And someone said it's either you have data or you just have an opinion. When you think about the current reality, a reality that is driven by geopolitical issues, I think today we're all realizing that a war can be happening in the Middle East. And we've got that ripple effect all the way to South Africa. We're all realizing interest rates being changed because of geopolitical issues have got a ripple effect across the world. Digitization has meant that customers of today want unique things, and by itself is a risk, because personalization is not very easy, because customers want to be identified for who they are and how they behave. We also, technology by itself is changing the way the world works. So think about this. We're expecting about 16 trillion US dollars of value to be created by AI. And we're already seeing investors shift their investments in these spaces to China and America, which means we have to monitor and be compliant to different types of cash flow, as well as interjurisdiction cash flows. Then organizations have to become efficient and repurpose people to deal with emerging risks. Like, for example, cybercrime. Climate change is a big one today for organizations, not forgetting cybersecurity. Then data and technology by itself are introducing new legal challenges, from privacy, protection of data, and ethical and responsible AI. Organizations can't deal with things the way they used to do before this reality came into place. And we look at data playing 5 different roles. The first one is actually just understanding the risks themselves, because gone are those days where the risks were predefined. So the risks are very unique and different today. Then the second one is identifying risks, because no organization has resources to use a blanket approach, and data with algorithms are helping to rank correctly risks so that people can focus on where the risks are and avoid a blanket approach. And this is a way of driving efficiency and effectiveness. The third part is the assessment, and I saw it on your slide, Nadine. Now, when you identify a risk, you have to assess the presence of the risk before you make a decision. And the reason why generative AI has been prominent, and we're looking at it as a way which is going to enhance or reimagine the future of risk, is because it can gather a lot of data around a certain risk and build context. And this way, you allow the human or individual to basically focus on decision making. A combination of data and these algorithms help provide context, right? And the third one is to even automate some of the decisioning. I liked the point around data can be the center of single source of truth, not just for the risk managers, but the wider organizations, because it allows the organization to understand how risks are evolving. And the last one I want to touch on is to measure effectiveness of risk controls. My friend Bill Schmaso said, if you can't measure it, then you're not doing it. So looking at trends, effectiveness of models, and that can only be done through data. So in that context, data has become more critical than ever. And if you don't have data, then probably don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, if I can add to that, your knowledge management and organizational learning, we talk about that knowledge hierarchy of data becoming information, becoming knowledge, becoming wisdom. And we can have this massive data that, as you say, I like what you said, that there's data or fact and opinion, is using what we've got instead of this sort of massive data that's ticking a governance box somewhere that we're doing this reporting, but it's not enabling any decision making or any creation of wisdom or anything like that. And then having that real-time information, and you know, if we go back to the theory of ISO 31000, one of the principles is that risk management must be based on the best available information. And we're not going to be able to achieve the benefits and the value of risk management and leading to resilience as well if we aren't confident in the information that we are reporting or discussing or anything like that. And then also bringing in the opportunity side as well, and understanding the positive aspects of achieving the opportunities within the organization. And that's where a lot of that wisdom really enables our resilience. But if the data gets stuck in the database,
exactly,
then what?
I'd like to, if we've got, I think we've got a few more minutes, I'd like to do a quick exercise, because you're 100% correct, it all sits in the data. And, you know, kind of that one source of truth. And that's, I think, why I don't like this traditional way of likelihood and impact, because unless I have substantive data that can tell me this is the likelihood of something happened, it's happened 6 times in the last 6 months, or this is the impact, you know, we've measured the reputational damage and the monetary value, that conversation can go around in circles. So that's why
it's a thumb suck.
Yeah, it's a thumb suck. It's people's perceptions, it's the experiences. So that's why we're leaning away from that and looking at things like, well, when this thing happens, you know, how quickly it happens. So if you'll allow me, I'm just going to quickly try and share my screen again. And there's a little exercise that we do sometimes with people, just to kind of showcase you know, the different ways in which data and systems interact. All right, so what I'd like to just ask the participants to do is, if you can have a look at the screen and find the numbers 1, and then find a number 2, and then find a number 3. So count for me in order. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds. And then the participants can just type in kind of like, what's the highest number you found? So if you went from 1 to number 14, type in 14. Just count for me more or less what's the numbers that you could find on the screen. So you can start. Okay, so, okay, no, I don't want you to find number 60. I want you to count to number 60. So those of you that follow the order to say from number 1, I'm going to find number 2. There we go. 17, 15. I'm going to find number 3, and so on and so on. So number 9, I see over there, 16, 18, 8, 21, 14. Okay, all right. So we're more or less in the low teens, thereabouts. I'm going to ask the participants that we redo the exercise. So you've now seen what it looks like. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the screen into 2 areas. So on the one side, you have odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and so on. And on the other side, you have even numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. So I'm going to restart the exercise. You're still going to count. You're going to find number 1, find number 2, find number 3, find number 4. And then see this time around how far you can count to. See if you can count further than the previous round. I'm going to give you some time. I'm going to start you now. And stop. Let's see if you got further. You can just give me a thumbs up if you got further. 26, 27, yeah, collectively it looks a little bit higher. 25, 20, right, it looks like, oh, 40. Okay, so I've got thumbs up, could count higher than the first time around. Okay, so this is a very, very simple analogy that I like to use to show people how, one, if we look at data long enough, sometimes it starts making sense, right? So if we just look at something long enough, sometimes we can start seeing patterns. The other thing is if we introduce a simple system or simple process in data, it can help us to make sense of it. And essentially what we're trying to do with data is a mess. It's all over the show. It's in different formats. It's all in different source systems. And what we're trying to do is we want to create insights from this data. And in order to do that, we need to kind of have the systems and processes and make sense of what it is that we're looking at. If we're looking at something like customer churn, is it really churn or is it something else? If we're looking at something like a drop in sales, is it really a drop in sales or linked to something else? So the whole idea is this interaction between data systems and processes to get us to make insights and to make decisions that are in the best interest of the business. Because if we get that wrong, that oftentimes leads us down a more riskier path. So I just wanted to share that quick exercise. I quite like doing it. Just to kind of show a little bit of the interaction between these two things and how incredibly valuable and important it is that we have that link.
So maybe also another point we can talk about the role of data, Nadine, to add in, to the example you gave is the risk functions are facing a change in operating models. Previously, we used to rely on controls, but the risks of today now require us to rethink of leading indicators so that we actually don't have to experience the risk incidents, whether it's a regulatory exception or whether it's a financial crime incident. And without data combined with, insights from what the risk objective is trying to achieve, it becomes very, very difficult. We also have to keep in mind some of the incidents we're looking for are very, very minute or constitute a very small proportion of the population or what we're trying to measure. So without data, it becomes like looking for a needle in a haystack. And through data and a combination of advanced algorithms, we are able to correctly classify these events or even correlate, indicators that would lead to this incident happening. So I'll give you an example. In the financial crime space, which is one of the areas I look after and I enable with data, we do have fraudulent transactions sometimes that take place on our customers' cards. But it's not a coincidence or something random. There's certain things that happen before a fraudulent transaction takes place. For example, information could be compromised about the card, or maybe a customer could be making a purchase at a high-risk place, or maybe a customer was exposed or robbed or something like that. All these incidents are represented by data. And therefore, our approach to risk management has changed. We can't just wait to assess the transaction. We have to keep in mind the fraudsters of today are very smart. They will actually transact behaviorally in line with the customer. These indicators help us to narrow down our area of focus so that our resources can be effective and maybe lead us to this transaction that we feel could be suspicious. So a combination of leading indicators and proactive management of these incidents through the help of data has actually been very critical. The other part is this makes ownership of the role of data become everyone's business, not just the data teams. The risk people in an organization as well as business owners have to contribute towards making sure that the data is collected, it's of high quality when it's moving between systems, but also it's maintained so that once it goes through rules or algorithms, it's a true reflection of the events that take place. So that's one of the things I wanted to share, the shift from, controls while things happen to leading indicators to proactively prevent these issues from happening.
Yeah, Mark, and I mean, what we busy doing at the moment with building risk appetite and tolerance frameworks is using those indicators, using the metrics, the data that we're reporting on anyway in our organizations, and pulling it into the risk realm as either a key risk indicator or a leading indicator, looking forward, or a performance indicator looking backwards. I mean, yesterday I was sitting with a team from Swaziland, and we had the finance guys, and we spoke debt ratio, credit, return on investment, all these different metrics that they were using anyway as business, and how do we build it into our risk appetite and tolerance, and having our intolerable, tolerable, and within our risk appetite. And then the next session was operations and their specific operations targets and performance monitoring. So using that data as well to, and as you say, with the performance indicators, that we're not just relying on our controls to be effective, we're looking proactively. And I think that speaks directly to the resilience as well, that we're on our toes, we understand our organization, we're speaking the language of our organization, that it's not just this, again, if speaking to data, that it's not just this irrelevant mass of numbers and whatever, and yeah, just really being on our toes, using what we've got to, and building the business into risk management, as well, that it's not just risk management as a team on its own. The other teams have got their data, they've got their processes and so on. It really is working all together, and the togetherness is a big component of resilience as well.
Yes, and additionally to that, the risks we're talking about, the threats are very interconnected. We talked of COVID. We found out that a lot of people are losing their jobs, businesses are losing, and in the financial services space, we were not just talking about affordability. We were also seeing cases of application fraud, because we know very well, those conditions are affecting everyone economically in a very tough way. And we also saw other crimes increase, application fraud, and we found that people who could be laundering money are also committing fraud. And this was the same across the world. And only through data you are able to create that integrated view and understand the connectedness of the threats and the risks that you're looking for. In a lot of organizations, the risk management has been siloed at a threat level. Yeah. And therefore, these threats manifest in a very unique way. One area deals with threat A, another one threat B, another one with threat D, E. And without centralizing that with data, it's very difficult to understand the interconnectedness. And only through data, you're able to create this integrated view to understand the correlation of these risks and how they're actually changing over time. And that's one of the areas where data is playing a major role, and people need to rethink risk management through that lens, because the old way of looking at it as silos and reporting it individually does not work anymore.
100%. I see here we have some questions from the chat. We seem to have a very engaging audience. So I'm just gonna, we've got some ones that were picked from our USB panel here as well. So Mario asks, are you aware of any frameworks being developed or already developed to address the current uncertainties that organizations face? Mario, we have designed a resilience framework. There are also standards on organizational resilience. There's a British standard on it. But our best form of resource at the moment is the Institute of Risk Management South Africa launched an integrated strategy, risk and resilience guideline 2 years ago, which is a phenomenal resource if you're looking for frameworks, how risk and resilience work together with strategy, a really good place to start. It's got nice tips and tools in terms of where to start with that one. I'm not sure if we can pop in the IMSA link into the chat line. Okay, Vanessa,
while you're speaking, I'm having a look for it.
Okay, thank you so much. Then we have a question here for Dr. Mark from Arnaud. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It says, what is your plan for integrating AI and Internet of Things securely into business operations? I think given your recent comment that you made, that's a very, very pertinent question.
So I look after the strategy for enabling the risk function across the group, manage its risks effectively, efficiently, and proactively. And one of the areas we're doing that is, first of all, creating this integrated view. And this view almost leverages IoT capabilities to bring insights from different areas together, keeping in mind the risks we're talking about manifest themselves through organization, through some of the digital channels, some of transacting systems, customer onboarding channels, as well as just some of the internal fraud and related threats where you've got people enabling threats within the organization. And without establishing that interconnectedness through data, it becomes very difficult. The second part in enabling this is changing operating models where people have to work with data, and this integrated view is automated and provided into platforms which people have to leverage to driving decisions. I'll give you an example. Just in the last year alone, we prevented almost 1.8 billion rand worth of fraud through the use of algorithms. But the algorithms will not have been effective if we had not created a single risk view from different systems and allowing our due diligence teams to get to decisions much quicker. And that is very similar for every other complex organizations. Remember, risks manifest in a very complex way. The more an organization is complex, the more difficult it is. The other part is we're on the journey of automating access to digital information for decision making. So we know very well regulation around risk management has become complex with some of the realities we're dealing with today. And we're building knowledge bases and leveraging some of the chat capabilities to allow people to self-empower themselves. But again, without IoT capabilities, this data was not developed and collected for this use. So we have to leverage different technologies to bring it together and analyze it so that it can be used on demand. So those are examples of where IoT data is helping to connect the dots and to make sure we reach to decisions much quicker.
Oh, that's yeah. It's quite a task though. It's not easy.
And also what's important there just is it's never done. There's always continual improvement. There's so much changing. We really just need to keep remaining dynamic and up to speed with what's happening out there, what's happening within our organizations, and make sure that the data and the processes and that everything is actually adding the right value, and we're not getting stuck in what we were doing 2 years ago or last month or whatever. We really, and I mean, in the, at FNB, I mean, market, you perfectly positioned to see that sort of dynamic nature. And yeah, we really, really have to remain up to speed.
Exactly. We have to outthink some of the risk incidents. Cannot outspend them. Some of them risk incidents are very expensive, whether it's data or whether it's people risk or whether it's just business risks that it's out of your control. And we've seen, for example, I say some of economic decisions result into inherent risk into the organization, that you have to deal with it because that's what might hold back your organization into the future. Remember, the people who consume your service and products do not actually care about your circumstances. They want a safe neighborhood. And the role of risk management today is to actually promote safety and desirability. A long time ago, risk was looked at as, you know, areas that do policing, but today it's an area that sells, you know, safety. It's like a neighborhood. You want to be in a platform where people are safe, and because you trust, your value proposition is built around trust.
Oh, trust is such a big one with resilience. I think you mentioned it in the beginning, Nadine.
No, it definitely
massive.
is. I think it's that culture of trust too.
Sure.
And I think trust for us means very much the ability to be vulnerable, you know, with your colleagues, with people. When you see something, raise your hand. When you're doing something that's not working, speaking up. It's so much broader than I think we've traditionally defined trust. Sure, there's great audience participation coming. I think there's a couple of questions that for me speak very much a similar language in terms of would we have risk management a separate role from audit in building resilience? It speaks towards how can you build resilience and risk management. So I think I'm going to take a stab at answering some of these questions combined. Whilst traditional risk management is still important because we need to make sure that the preventative measures are there. So that's the baseline standard from an information security perspective, password control, account management, things like that. The baseline standards are very much necessary. So whilst we incorporating elements of resilience, there needs to be a function that tests operationally where there are controls in place. Are they working? Are they effective? Are they still relevant? So in my view, I could be wrong, the risk management function works hand in hand with operational audit to kind of go and test where the high risk area is the preventative measures in place. On top of that, there can then be an additional component of resilience, which focuses on not necessarily reducing the likelihood and the impact, but literally focusing on the big major disruptions, such as a cyber event or a hack or a flood, and building resilience capabilities then across the organization. So not necessarily just those in charge of doing the preventative controls, but those in charge of actually running the ship when something is hit it. Yeah. We find that typically in organizations that happens throughout many levels. Once you start the journey, you'll kind of see people in different units in the organization that have an interest in this. And we've kind of earmarked them as our resilience champions. They're across there. If you have the right conversations, they don't necessarily have to be in a leadership capability, but these are the guys that when you have a problem, they're hands on deck, they come with the solutions, they want to get involved. So those are the people that you will typically start gathering in your circle. And then there is one that speaks about, one of the questions from Jeff says, the most significant challenge is conveying appropriate risk communication between the various internal and external opposing sides. So when you have something like credit card fraud, Mark, I know in F&B's word, credit card fraud means money lost to you. In our world, when fraud credit cards get utilized to spend on our products, there is the business decision to say, hey, but we're making money. So there needs to be a very clear ethical directive to say we are against this kind of business. We are against getting money from stolen credit cards. So I think the easiest way that we found to change the narrative from risk to resilience is instead of debating again the likelihood and impact, take the question off the table. So when people tell you a problem, say, oh, but what if this and what if, you know, I can't know the likelihood and I can't say, okay, fine. Well, you know, what if you get hit tomorrow? What is your plan? You know, who are you going to call? If we get hacked tomorrow, if we do pick up an alert, what do we do? And that immediately changes the conversation from having the typical risk debate. Let's fill in a register, let's rank it. It then goes, people go, oh, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And it changes immediately the perception that people have of risk professionals. It's definitely not an easy thing to do. It's a long journey, but it makes for a much more interesting debate. And all of a sudden, I don't believe in like awareness campaigns and things like that. I believe if you find the people in the business that believe what you believe, they will be your advocates. And what we've seen is you have a few of these interesting conversations, and the next thing you know, people are going, hang on, get them in the meeting room. They have a few different ideas. And so you build your capabilities throughout the organization.
And having, sorry, to reiterate that, having the conversation, not getting stuck in this is our risk register. Let's look at this risk now, then our cause, then our consequence, then our controls, whatever. Yes, we've got to have a repository for risks. As you say, we've got to have a structure, but not getting stuck in that. Having the conversations. People know their organizations, but we get almost overwhelmed when now we've got to write it out as a risk. You know what keeps you awake at night. Have the conversations. Get everyone into the boardroom, you know, or surveys or conversations over coffee or whatever. What's concerning you? What do you, exactly as you say, what do we think, you know, what is our worry here and so on? Is really keeping it conversational and not talking about it as traditional risks as we understand them.
And I think also there's definitely a tolerance for risk acceptance that goes with it, because a lot of the things, let's face it, you won't be able to put a control in place. You know, people say, oh, well, we're now safe with cybersecurity. No, we're not. You know, hackers are out there thinking of new things every day to do. They are way ahead of us. There are organizations that do this for a living. And I think sometimes it's, you know, oh, I don't know what to do. Okay, cool. Let's do a risk acceptance paper to say, we have these issues. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know what to do about it. I'm going to accept this risk because this is the industry that I'm in. This is the country that I'm in. This is what I'm exposed to. Make it known across the organization so that we know then, okay, you know what, let's not waste our time in trying to prevent this thing, that even if we try and prevent it, it could still happen. Let's rather work on what do we do when it does, than trying to bring a risk level down to an acceptable tolerance. We have to relook at the tolerances that we set because there's so many more unknowns. All right, so I'm going back to some more of the questions here. Oh, I like this one. So this is another question here that we've got on how often, this is a good one, how often should we conduct vulnerability assessments? Vanessa, you're in the consulting space. What would your recommendation be?
So we get this from clients often, from a business continuity side as well as risk management. Obviously, you need to have a peg in the sand at least annually, or at least, you know, depending on resources, the size of your organization, the level of complexity you want to go into, or when change occurs. So it might be we talk about plan change or detected change. So if there's been a lot of change, relook at your stuff, even if it was last month, but now you've had a massive restructure, relook at our vulnerabilities. We've just come through elections. There was a lot of uncertainty and risks that people were looking at from you know, coming up to elections. Now there's this whole, the government of national unity, the you know, how are things going to affect us? So it's not just a static process, but we do, if we are an industry that doesn't see a lot of change, public sector, you know, we don't see as much change, but you know, then have a benchmark that it is at least annually, but change is the trigger. That's the short answer.
Mark, in your experience, I think you're in a fairly fluid environment on your side, dealing with the internet and AI and all these things. What would you say to that?
We have to do it continuously. And in fact, we realized from the trends and the ability of criminals to leverage technology to execute, and you know, some of the attacks at any time, or we're a very, you know, multi-event, high continuous event transactions. We process almost 3,000 transactions a second. You cannot have even regular, checks or revisits of your controls. You have to do it continuously, and we realize that we don't actually have appetite to wait for so long. We've developed capabilities that actually draw insights out of these events continuously. Some of our fraud models run every 10 minutes or every 5 minutes, so that we want to be proactive in understanding, are we going out of appetite? Are any risks likely to be missing? Or are things just changing? And for us to have been able to do that, and maybe it's one of the comments I wanted to finish with today, is we've embarked on a journey on making sure every risk professional is a data professional, because we want everyone to make decisions while referencing data. not necessarily build fancy algorithms, but to be able to question appetite using data, to be able to question trends using data, to be able to quantify the impact, because there's a chance that every conversation will be the same. Then the only difference that will be, the only difference will come from context, and that will come from through data. And it's important to think about literacy, be able to be comfortable around data. And this is all the way from leadership to frontline staff in the risk management space, so that you can revisit your appetites continuously, the controls, all lines of defense must be able to quantify the impact of risks.
Yeah, and I think also it's interesting because I mean we've given two fairly different answers. Is different industries will have different needs. And it's really how what's going to work for our industry, our type of organization, our level of maturity. You know what I mean? We see a lot of organizations that aren't even close to even getting one round of assessing their risks done in a cycle, let alone being able to do it continuously. So yeah, it's very, very organization specific as well, and the level of maturity needs to match what the complexity is.
Then on Vanessa, just from your side first, and then I'll give it over to Dr. Mark. Just some final thoughts for our participants. We've had a great audience. They've been very lively. It's so nice to have a risk conversation, and people aren't. There's this perception that we're very boring in the risk world, and so I'm loving the audience participation. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but maybe Vanessa, just some final thoughts that you can leave our participants with, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Mark to also just give a few seconds on his views before we close it out.
Yeah, that's always a hard one. So I'll try and keep it brief, but I really think the culture is so important. The having that culture of innovation, we talked about togetherness, being proactive. I mean, it's all lovely, big, sort of fluffy words, but they are so critical. So yeah, innovative, proactive, empowerment, and togetherness, and partnering with business. If you are a risk professional, if you are in audit, wherever you are in your organization as a driver of risk management or whatever you might be, is partnering with the rest of the organization. And I think that's come clear today, that it's not about separate. So yeah, really working together for the good of the organization. And if we're pulling against each other, we're never going to succeed. But that culture can be one of the most difficult. It's easy to write frameworks, it's easy to put systems in place, but that organizational culture has so many layers and so many dynamics and people. So as my sister-in-law says, she prefers pets to people. So so yeah, that's what we're dealing with. And really just having that really robust organizational culture.
Much. Mark, your final thoughts that you want to leave our audience with?
Yes, so in today's world, stakeholders, leaders are not just thinking about opportunities. They are equally concerned about what could go wrong, what risks the organizations, customers are facing. This has made actually risk management probably the most in demand and area with more opportunities for innovation. And to do this, we have to embrace emerging technologies, data, AI, and rethink our roles and help ourselves by preparing to keep up with this future that is already here. So I would like to encourage everyone who's in the risk management space to think about risk management in a very optimistic way, but also prepare, upskill, think about how you can play your same function, but in a data AI enabled way to make sure that you keep up with what's happening.
Definitely. I think as we're closing out, one of the things that we've realized is, I used to hate this word, navigating complexity. because it became such a catchphrase. But I do think one of the things, if we want to move through all the disruption and to want to measure risk in a different way, we have to rethink uncertainty as opportunity. We've got to rethink the way in which we look at strategy and rediscover what stability means to us. We've got to be comfortable with disruption. We've got to expect the unexpected and really, have a bit of a reframed vision in terms of, what is disruption, what is risk, and get comfortable in the discomfort, because then we can have the really necessary conversations that people typically will go, oh, no, it'll never happen. Chances are it will. So thank you so much for our participants. I'm going to hand it back to USB to do the closing. And yeah, thanks again for the interaction. It's always nice as a risk professional to see people actively engaging.
Getting excited.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, everybody. We've run just slightly over time. Thank you to everybody who has joined us for today's webinar. It has been an engaging session filled with valuable insights. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your expertise and perspectives. And thank you to our audience for your active participation and valuable contributions to the discussion. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to highlight a few exciting updates. Dr. Mark Nasila has just authored a new book on AI in Africa, shown on the screen and available online and in stores across the continent. Secondly, Intake 2 of SBS Ed's newly launched online program in risk management is starting on the 17th of September, with new applications open now. Details are in the chat. Lastly, we do hope you will join us for the third installment of our Power Hour webinars taking place on the 21st of August, where we discuss leadership in the era of change. Thank you and have a good week ahead. Goodbye and until next time.